Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to let people arrive in here. I see our attendee list is growing. Just give it maybe a few seconds for people to log in. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is NARUC's Innovation Webinar Series. Today's topic is investing in climate resilience with innovative wildfire mitigation technologies. For those of you that don't know, NARUC is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, which is a nonprofit organization representing the state utility regulatory commissions in all 50 states and US territories. NARUC member agencies regulate electricity, natural gas, telecommunications, and water utilities. Next slide, please. NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation, which puts on these webinars, is a grant-funded team dedicated to providing technical assistance to our members. This webinar series looks at emerging challenges and connects state commissions with expertise and strategies to help them make informed best practices and in their decision making. And please feel free to visit our website for new resources that we're putting out routinely. We're delighted that Commissioner Tawney from the Oregon Public Utilities Commission is here with us and moderating today's event, and I will turn things over to her to introduce our panel. Commissioner, please.
Thanks so much, Will, and thanks so much to NARUC and CPI for hosting such an excellent series of webinars on issues that are front and center for us as commissioners, particularly around the emerging risks. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. I think participants will be really pleased to hear the dialogue from practitioners who are at the forefront of this topic. So today we have Mr. Stuart Cedras. He's the senior technical lead and strategist for the electric grid resilience capabilities at the Office of Electricity at DOE. And he's a recognized energy expert specializing on critical infrastructure resilience and detecting vulnerabilities in advanced complex systems. It is no light task. He has 30 years of experience in the federal government, where he's been actively engaged in a wide range of activities, from R&D to modeling, up through the national and international policy negotiations and field operations. And he currently manages the Office of Electricity's Small Business Innovation Research portfolio. He advises DOE leadership on issues related to grid resilience against wildfire and other threats, and really is at that forefront for advanced technologies. We also today have Arvin Satyam. He's the Chief Commercial Officer for Pano AI and part of the founding team. Prior to Pano, he spent over a decade building and scaling Cisco's Internet of Things business across the globe, both with governments and enterprise customers. Growing up in Sydney, Australia, and now living in San Francisco, the fires are top of mind, and he's passionate about bringing emerging tech solutions to this challenge. And Bill Messner joins us from Portland General Electric here in Portland, where I am. He joined PGE early in February 2014 as the director of the newly centralized safety department. And since that time, he's been director of several departments, including safety, security and resiliency, and most recently named the director of wildfire mitigation and resiliency. He joined PGE from Southern California Edison, and he was in Rosemead, California, where he began his journey as an attorney, specializing in environmental, real property and local governance law. And it's not common to have an attorney make the transition into leading technology, but I think it brings an important problem-solving skill set. He later served as director and principal manager of the corporate environmental health and safety department at Southern California Edison before coming up to PGE. And he was instrumental there in working to transform the SoCal Edison safety culture, which really underpins much of the what we need to do as we tackle the wildfire challenge. So I'm going to lead off with each presenter is going to present to us for a few minutes on their work. And we're going to save the second half of the hour for conversation among them and your questions. So as you're listening to their presentation, think about questions that you want to ask. You can use the Q&A function in the webinar, and we'll be able to read those and bring them into the conversation. So with that, Stuart, why don't you lead us off? And you're muted.
Thank you, Commissioner, for the introduction. Will, thank you for the invitation. Let's go to the next slide and let's jump on this. Okay, one of the things that people in general, tend to think when they think about wildfires, California, but in reality, wildfire is a national threat. And I have here a list of the top 50 most impacted wildfires back in 2020. Clearly, you see California, Oregon ranks pretty highly. You see places like Montana, Texas, and even Florida. Next, please. So in my office and the department, when we think about power grid resilience as it relates to tackle the issue of wildfires, we take a look and we take into three key considerations. And one of them is we have to recognize that equipment in the electric grid can actually cause fires, and as a result, wildfires. Another consideration is that fires can be caused by something else. It could be arson, could be a lighting, the stroke in the woods, could be anything. But it can put the grid at risk, like transmission lines and things like that. So we have to take that also into consideration. And of course, we have to consider the cascading effects. You lose a transmission line, what happened 100, 200, 300 miles away? That's when microgrids and things like that come into factor. Next, please. So with that in mind, we came with a top-down and bottom-up approach. Top-down meaning that we identify three categories that help us identify technologies, and that is prevention, detection, and mitigation. And of course, we have the adaptability, which applies to any kind of threat, adapting when you lose portion of the grid. And when we go from the bottom up, we identify 8 focus areas because the issue with detection and mitigation is so broad that we had to narrow it down to be able to identify the correct technologies that are needed. And those technologies you see in the bullets: sensing and detection, situational awareness, the area modeling and analytical tools, etc. Next, please. So in the last couple of years, we have done other projects in the past, but this is the ones that we have focused on the last couple of years. We have invested in some of the national labs. Here's some examples. We have Oak Ridge National Lab on the left with the real-time aerial sensors. They also working sensors that deal with arcing fault, which is that big fire that can happen in the, in the power lines. We're also working with SLAC, which is one of the national labs from DOE in California. They're doing preventing. They're applying artificial intelligence to identify the way to prevent by applying risks and other tools that deal with modeling. And of course, we also deal with small businesses under the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And, we have about 4 projects there. The ones that I highlight are the ones I'm going to speak briefly, with one from the lab and one from the small business. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about, and both of the technologies I'm going to talk about deal with drones. And this one was performed by a small business. We funded them in May. It was a small company called Brains for Drones, woman-owned. She's an engineer. She's pretty bright. Her husband is pretty bright too. And they originally got a phase 1 and phase 2 to deal with emergency response, to do assessments, working with a utility in the Southeast for issues like hurricanes and stuff like that. And we transferred this capability into, vegetation management and doing inspection using drones, off-the-shelf drones. And what they're doing is they're applying artificial intelligence and sensors technology to perform inspections. They were working together, and they were working together with two cooperatives in Oregon. They did their demonstration in one of those cooperatives this past Wednesday. It went pretty well. One of the things about this particular technology is that they're using off-the-shelf drones, and this one are very small. It can fit in your hand. And because they were very small, they were able to adapt the technology. Instead of putting the AI algorithm in the drone, they put it in the laptop. So you don't even have to go to control center. You can do it there in a laptop, and that allows the utility to take care of business immediately. Next slide, please. See, this is some visual illustration of their technology as it relates to sensors, infrared, etc. Let's go to the next one. The other technology is one that we funded Oak Ridge National Lab. And this one also deals with drones. The previous one dealt with distribution, the one from the small business. This one we funded for transmission lines. And what they do is they have a swarm of drones, small drones off the shelf, and they fly them around using Oak Ridge developed sensors, so they can do all kind of inspections and collecting the signature that they then evaluate to detect if something is wrong with equipment or the lines. And they also can do vegetation management. This particular technology was demonstrated about 3 times in the last 9 months. One of them was in Montana in a transmission line. Something else I wanted to mention about this is that they are also, another thing they're doing for us is that they're evaluating the beyond the visual line of sight, which allow those drones to fly where the operator or the pilot cannot see them, but the drones is doing their job. Let's go to the next slide, please. When they deal with the beyond the visual line of sight, they are actually using the same sensors. They deal with a control center. I don't think I have a lot of time to hit on that video. It is a little video there with a demonstration. But I'm going to leave it there. I know these slides are going to be shared, but is applied the Internet of Things. It also applies, they have the cybersecurity aspects. It is a very, very, very strong technology. Next slide, please. Next. And this is my last slide to share with you the fact that last year organized 4 webinars after I did an inventory of capabilities, either funded by DOE or done by the labs. All these capabilities are from the labs. We have 4 webinars. We have people from the States. We have people from utilities, vendors. And it was about 31 technology brief. we have that in our website, which if you go to the next slide, and you can find it there in the Office of Electricity website under the title Office of Electricity, that link that you see there. This is my email. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And you can follow us in Twitter and LinkedIn. And this is pretty much what I have. I'm looking forward later for the questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Stuart. It's so great to see DOE bringing the national labs to the challenge, and then marrying up small businesses and the innovation that's sort of out there on the landscape, and supercharging it with the federal dollars. So exciting to see. Thank you. I had the opportunity to see the Brains for Drones demo, and it was really impressive and also very accessible for smaller co-ops, which I thought was really, really an important need in the rural West. Arvin, do you want to introduce us to the Pano AI technology and your use cases?
Absolutely. And Commissioner, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for NARUC for having us as part of this session. And Commissioner, as you were doing the intro, I'm sitting here in San Francisco and I could feel a small tremor. And I was thinking, uh-oh, that's an entirely different type of threat, but thankfully it was just a very small tremor. And Stuart, it was enlightening to hear some of the innovation that's happening. And I think what really motivated us as a company, our journey began 2.5 years ago. The commissioner mentioned, I grew up in Australia, on the backdrop 2.5 years ago, most of the eastern seaboard of Australia was surrounded by a ring of fire. And we're coming off in 2020 of the worst fire season in California and many of the states on the West. So what we really saw was a need for technology to be a force multiplier. And we've seen innovation from many corners of technology to really provide that actionable intelligence. And there's satellite imagery, which many of you are pulling in. There's drones, Stuart, as you've discussed, and the need for drones, as well as ultra high definition cameras for situational awareness, along with ground mounted sensors. And I think it takes all of this innovation to really solve that equation. What I wanted to share with you is what we're doing at Pano. And we really took on the task of really bringing together ultra high definition cameras with satellites, with artificial intelligence to provide that actionable intelligence to utility stakeholders, but also to the partners, their partners that are focused on emergency response. So let me jump into how we do this. We start with ultra high definition cameras, and the concept of cameras for wildfire detection and situational awareness, certainly on the West Coast of the US, has been around for a while. But we heard from many end users that there's some key gaps that they'd like to get addressed. Today, the workflow in many of the systems is you have a 911 call that comes in, and then you move the camera to go investigate the incident. But often what happens is the early moments of the fire gets missed because the camera may be focused in one direction and the fire starts at another direction. So from the get-go in all of our installs, we really think about a full 360-degree approach. And we do that by having cameras that are continuously rotating, and they do a full rotation each minute. We stitch this together. And the next thing that we want to do is really compress the time for when an incident gets called in and really provide that intelligence to utilities and first responders and others very quickly. We do this by having a smoke detection algorithm that's continuously running on this 360-degree imagery, day as well as at nighttime. And what we're really looking for, and as you're seeing that imagery, we're really looking for texture and movement and smoke. And we've trained this model with a large data set of historical images, and we also are training it real time with imagery across different microclimates in different states across the US, and I'll talk to where that's deployed. But the other thing that we also took on was we wanted to make sure that when we send notifications to our stakeholders, that they're a very high degree of confidence. And we do that by having a human intelligence center that complements the artificial intelligence. They do this by looking at each smoke start and trying to understand, is that smoke? Or is that a farmer with a tractor going down a hill that's spitting up a dust cloud? It's really hard to distinguish 10, 15 miles away. And so we quickly learned from that. Or when we were deployed in places like Montana and Colorado, snow machines were spitting up snow, which 10 miles away looked like smoke. So it's really important to look at the technology, but also build the operational intelligence. And in the case of Oregon, we found that there were certain locations from where our cameras were looking where there was chimney smoke from factories, and they were using a set schedule. And we wanted to learn that intelligence. So working with Bill and team, we wanted to know what were true threats and what were things that we just understood were just regular. We tie all this together into a software platform where you can pull in the full 360 with the alerts, understand the fuel levels, look at asset overlay, a whole bunch of things that really provide that visibility. Now, how does this compare to a traditional workflow? So for us, we really saw value in being able to compress the detection, the confirmation, and the dissemination of incidents. We believe that the early minutes really matter. Every large fire starts as small fire. And so if you can get intelligence on when smoke starts, and we do this with our own cameras, but we're not limited to our own cameras. We can also pull in an existing set of cameras. We also pull in satellites. We pull in Ghost 16, Ghost 17, and we're also in process of integrating other data points. Our intelligence center is listening to alerts from Arvin Alerts, Pulse Point, Twitter, other known sources. We give you the visual intelligence to confirm, and then quickly disseminate that to a whole bunch of stakeholders. And that really speeds up that response. And then post-incident, you've got the ability to analyze and really look at preventative measures that may benefit you going forward. In terms of our deployments, we're deployed in 5 states in the US, and we're also deployed in multiple states in Australia. The thing that's really notable here is our journey from the get-go. We've started working with many of the utility peers that are here on this requirement. So we've been working very closely with Portland General, with the likes of PG&E, and we're expanding our footprint with Excel and Holy Cross in Colorado as well. And in each of these scenarios, we know that utilities have key intelligence that they could derive from this, but it's also important to make sure that first responders that are really responding to these threats get that real-time intelligence. We've also staffed up a community engagement team who are actively onboarding dispatch centers, federal, state, and local county fire authorities, because for us, getting those incidents out to stakeholders that are really in the process of responding to those incidents is critical. And so we've been doing that, and we've actually had a lot of positive feedback in Oregon from the likes of ODF, from the dispatch centers, from fire authorities, and especially in light of some of the PSPS incidents, it's helped them accelerate that response. I want to take you through what this looks like in a real life setting. So this is a Hawn Creek case study. This was pretty interesting because we deployed this particular location. We were just in the process of onboarding to ODF. So it really gave us the ability to look at what happened with the system. And because ODF wasn't receiving the alerts at this point, we could kind of compare and contrast this. So I want to show you first what this looks like on the system itself. So when we notified the stakeholders, so Bill and the Portland General team, their situational awareness team received a notification of the incident. So they could see it triangulated, they could see it relative to the grid. And you've also got the ability to look at satellite intel, and this is done within the first couple of minutes. Now, ODF, if I jump back to this particular slide here, the reason why this was an interesting incident is this happens to be in a high fire risk area for Portland. ODF was notified of this incident at 5:09 p.m. and the actual incident started at 3:19 p.m. Thankfully, the incident was only 2 acres and there wasn't strong winds that could kind of lead it to really spread quickly. But in this particular workflow, we detected, we confirmed with our intelligence center and notified within the first couple of minutes. And so the utility stakeholders were able to get that intelligence, and the 911 call came in almost an hour, 110 minutes later. And then we heard from ODF that it took them almost an hour to actually find it while they were driving around looking for it amongst the trees. Now, while this incident was small, if this were an incident with a fast rate of spread, you can imagine how this could dramatically change with the fire authorities getting that visibility, dramatically change and contain how large that incident could get to. The other thing I want to share with you is how this works day to day. So this was incidents where you send out a notification through text or email. You can see exactly where the smoke starts. And then some of the additional functionality that we're providing stakeholders is through optical zoom, the ability to look 10, 15 miles out to get this type of resolution, which really helps stakeholders think about risk response and also safety of personnel, which is really an important thing for many of the stakeholders involved. And the last thing, the commissioner, as we were chatting about this, what are some additional benefits? With the 360, we can look at beyond wildfire threats. The triangulation allows you to figure out exactly where it is relative to assets and other structures. We've also found that utility line crews are using it for inspection. And then pre-incident, especially leading into a red flag day, you can start looking at fuel conditions, and meteorology teams are doing that. We're also working closely with utilities to overlay utility assets so they can understand risk relative to where their key assets are. So that's a quick overview. Look forward to the discussion. I'll pass it back to you, Commissioner.
Thanks so much, Arvin. It's exciting to see the layers of capabilities sort of building over time. You start with one idea, but then add capabilities as you go along. And Bill, we of course have just had a rough weekend with east winds and our first really large scale public safety power shutoffs. And so would love to hear how you're thinking about these technologies and where we go from here.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody attending. I'll quickly just who we are. So I don't know if all of you know where we're located, but we're in the Pacific Northwest. We have a 4,000 square mile service territory, and there's some statistics there that you can see about us, but I won't go through all of those. But I just wanted to give you just level set where we're located. Next slide, please. So there's a lot going on here, but let me just first start off with look at the magenta areas, and that is our high fire risk areas. And I know there's a lot of boxes covering things up, but we have a total of 10 that we have identified. And I think one of the things about as you approach this subject, you have to think about it in the way I think about it is three categories. One is trying to understand your risk first. So where is the risk? Then, okay, situational awareness, I think, is your next key element. And then after that, to me, it's about operations and hardening the system. And as we are approaching this issue, I mean, we have to be in and always be in looking at how to be innovative in this space. I think this is going to be evolving. Climate change is going to continue to change, and technologies are going to be very much a key factor to what we have in place in order to combat this risk for our customers and the communities that we're part of. So as Commissioner Tani just mentioned, that we just went through an event, and I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about Pano, and then we'll get into the discussion. But yeah, we just experienced a large event that happened this weekend, as Commissioner Tani just mentioned. Part of our leaning in on this is innovation in terms of meteorology up front. So having to be on the front end of that situation and understanding what's coming is key, and all technology is really impactful in that space. And so the box that you see there is just saying that we saw this pattern coming in as soon as like a week before. What that drives us to do is it starts us to lean into our corporate incident management team, in which we fully activated on Tuesday. And in our state, like California, we have rules in order to communicate with our customers and public safety partners and critical customers, and we follow those rules and those timelines. But to make a long story very short, I mean, we saw this coming in, we activated our team, and on Tuesday/Wednesday, we were telling our customer base that this is a high likely event that was going to take place. And we actually started turning off power on Friday morning around 2:30 in the morning. And I think our last de-energization was about 2:30 in the morning the next day, so Saturday. That storm went through. We were able to start doing our restoration Saturday afternoon, and all power was back up on Sunday. But during that process, the darker blue boxes there are planned predetermined PSPS areas. And then we had 7 preventive power outages. And so the technology that Arvin talked a little bit about, and the meteorology and the field observations, we actually do use humans as well. We want to get there, what is actually happening in the field. It's not just a technology-based approach, but also the intel that we get from our public safety partners allowed us to make other informed decisions about turning off power. We impacted about 37,000 customers. And again, they were all back up and running on Sunday evening. But that just gives you an idea of what we went through. I'm more than willing to talk about more details on what we've learned. We are actively learning. Just a conversation right before here, we've already started our after action review. That includes reaching out to our emergency county managers, clearly internal, clearly to the commission that oversees us, as well as our customers. So we're looking forward to actually having a lot of learning. And this is a tool that we have. I will say it is a tool in our toolbox. There's a lot of other things that we have to put in place. And this is not a decision that we take lightly. There is impacts for turning off power to our customers. They rely on it for their health needs, and or think about turning off power during the high fire risk area. So their wells that they have as well to try to help prevent a fire. So it is a tool, and I think it's one that we're all starting to see that has some valuable aspects to it. But we have to continue to invest and harden the grid. So let me just go to the next slide, and then we'll go jump right into the conversation. And Arvin talked about this, but this is so he had an image that kind of showed the West Coast. This is us zoomed in. And basically our high fire risk zones are on the east and west of our service territory. So where those cameras are kind of this outline where our risk is. And by having these cameras in place is that it does allow us to actually pinpoint where that fire is, as we talked about. And fires are caused for many reasons, right? It's not just a utility-based conversation. So these cameras are actually adding a lot of other benefit to us as Oregonians. And the speed of response, that 110 minutes is critical. When we entered this research item a couple years ago through EPI to get to Pano, we were just testing it, but it has paid off in spades, I would say. And in addition, when we entered this, we bought other licenses. So we are giving licenses to ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry, and other agencies. So they are getting that information in real time. And one of the other neat things about this technology is that we're not, when that fire is detected, it is going right to that agency. So it's not coming to us to go to the agency. It is coming to both of us at the same time. So we're not getting in the middle of the situation. We want to get that quick response. With talking to agencies too, we're starting to see some other benefits from this technology, which is, we're in a Cascadia subduction zone, so a large earthquake where we are located that will come, not if, but will. But there's this technology can help us say, okay, where is that response? What can we do? We can help first responders respond. During ice storms and other windstorm events too, it is going to help first responders and emergency county managers. So there's these other ancillary benefits that clearly I was hyper-focused on wildfire when we first went into this research. It is providing a lot more benefit to our community that we're part of. And I think that's with all research, is that there's a lot of hidden gems as you go down and you start looking at something, but there's a lot of other ancillary benefits. And this is just a prime example of that. But with that, let me pause, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much. And let's go ahead and take down the slides so we can see everybody. And I think as regulators, we really grapple with new technologies. This has been a part of the smart grid conversation for a decade. We're not really very good at taking on R&D, which is why it's so excellent that DOE puts money into the R&D cycle. But I'm curious, as you think about how we should weigh these utility investments into these mitigation technologies, and I think part of our challenge, there's the whole piece where we're not very comfortable taking technology risk, and there's the piece that wildfires are so bad, so catastrophic, that sort of you could argue spending an unlimited amount of money is appropriate, which is not really possible by ratepayers, right? We're looking for the cost-effective solution. So how should we think about how we weigh this investment and how we judge it as regulators? Anyone who wants to jump in?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. And this is Bill Messner's opinion. So I think one is this embrace research is probably the first thing, and recognize that it has a role in this topic, and it has a role in the topic for how we run the grid already. But I think that's the one thing I think is just understanding that there is a benefit there, and just even having that, this opens the conversation. And then I think the other thing that has to be weighed, and your point about it, our customers, we have to invest their dollars wisely. And I think the other thing that has to be weighed into this conversation is that there's many items that we want to do as a company. I think there's many items that we want to see happen in place as Oregonians. And I suspect there's many items as commissioners that you want to see in place. But the dollar can be stretched, only so much. And so I think it's really important to try to have a risk philosophy about how you do those investments and where to put those dollars. And I think once you can settle on that, it's important. And then I would just end, the last thing is that people understand research is research, and not everything's going to play out. And so sometimes, that research may be exactly what we thought it would be, and it's going to play off very well. It actually may shift a little bit and say, oh my goodness, it's actually something completely different. We're going to go away from the original concept. And then sometimes research is just not going to pan out. And that investment in that research, I would argue, is still important, and not to shy away from that investment of future research if there is a project that doesn't pan out. And it also takes time. And I think that's one of the things that in this space, we want to move very quickly, but it does still take time.
And just to build on top of that, Commissioner, I think it's a great question. I know when we were evaluating the merits of really building a company around this, we found it really useful looking through the wildfire mitigation plans and the guidance from many of the utility commissions on the West Coast, right? Directionally, there was already a need for more situational awareness and a call towards AI and a call for many of these things getting integrated. But to Bill's point, right, we wanted to make sure that the problem was big enough, that it was something where there was going to be investment to justify the R&D that technologists like us and other companies would go through, because it's not a 3-month or a 12-month, it's going to be an iterative process. And we've learned a lot going through EPRI and working closely with PGE or PG&E or other utility stakeholders, because what we started off with, it has evolved dramatically by the course of just being in the game and learning, because there is the tool itself, the technology, but then how it's being applied based on incidents. And I think for us, it's a case of knowing that it's a space that's investable and where innovation is something that can thrive into that. So I think for us, we found the regulators really highlighting the space as just an important part of our journey. But to Bill's point, it is research initially, but it needs to be applied. And I think some of that time horizon also needs to be there so we can justify and create the ROI.
Yeah, Stuart from DOE. So we're approaching things a little bit different. We base our research on needs. And some of those needs we can identify now by working and listening to the utilities and others. And some of the research, it might go from the embryonic stages and take 5 to 10 years, Well, others we might be able to accelerate based on that work that we anticipated before. Like, for example, the two technologies that I spoke about today, those sensor technology and AI, there are things that, at least from the lab's perspective, the sensor technology, they've been developing that kind of technology for a while. But we were able to identify them last year and this year to fund them, to accelerate them because of what's going on with wildfires, so they can deploy it or can be commercialized now. And we did that with 4 technologies. The Secretary of Energy requested for us to fund 4 technologies that 2 of them are presented, and there were a couple of them that I made reference when I was talking about what we're funding. So, but this calendar year, those technology will be so advanced that if somebody pick it up, or in the case of Brentford drones, they're ready to commercialize, it can go to the field. So for us, it's working with the utilities to identify needs, because we recognize utilities are also doing stuff, but things cost money, and we have the taxpayers' money that we can use to take the higher risk, higher reward research.
And I appreciate that partnership that you're talking about, right? There's ratepayer dollars, there's taxpayer dollars, and understanding sort of which risk profile, what each role has is really, I think, critical. I'm curious, how do you think about the co-benefits or the societal benefits in these technologies or in the efforts? Like, is that top of mind? Is it a nice to have around the edges? And I think about it in part, like I said, got to see the Brains for Drones demo at one of the co-ops here in Oregon. And it really struck me that one of the co-benefits that the utility team was really focused on was the way it was going to reduce worker injury risk. Because we have this incredibly rugged terrain to inspect these lines. They hike them in adverse conditions. You know, it's either snow or it's rattlesnakes or it's whatever, and that creates a worker risk, right? And so that was weighing into their cost benefit equation in a way that nothing to do with wildfire risk. And I'm curious how you think about developing for or packaging in the co-benefits, or even just finding the co-benefits as they emerge.
Well, I'm happy to go first on it. You know, as I think about the benefits itself, I think first and foremost, there are stakeholders that we designed the solution for. And then it's evolved as we found that many stakeholders need this visibility. I'll call out one example, which was really notable. We really looked at this for wildfire detection, and really stop the spread of catastrophic wildfires and the impact. But something else that emerged was prescribed burning, right? Which is a healthy practice, and it's something that's been done in forest management. But some of these prescribed burns and could go out of control, right? Just by virtue of environmental conditions and things like that. So we've found that one of the benefits that's quickly emerged is you've got the ability to do safer prescribed burning by looking at AI, by looking at flare-ups, because the artificial intelligence tells you when this happens. And there was one incident in Aspen which took them years to plan for. And if you look at the visual footage, I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, oh my God, is that whole area okay? But it was one where they had a lot of stakeholders from the Forest Service and other agencies. What would have normally led to having them a large deployment for multiple days, they were able to monitor flare-ups for 3 days afterwards. And it really helped them get a better understanding. It helped them allocate resources more effectively, and it gave visibility to many stakeholders, right? The fire authorities, the Forest Service, utilities, and others. So I think that was just an interesting use case, and it speaks to walking in with certain benefits in mind, and then quickly learning that there are others that are going to come in.
Yes, if I may provide a couple points, at least from the federal government, the federal government identified 16 critical sectors, meaning if those sectors fail, it will have an economical, societal, or impact to the security of the nation. And we recognize that electricity is the lifeline to all those critical sectors. So aside, if you lose electricity, your banking system is impacted. Society is impacted. The economical aspect of the nation is impacted. Or defense is impacted. So that's why we focus on what we focus on. We look at the threats, we look at the hazards. And hazard doesn't have to be just weather related. It could be terrorism. It could be technological hazards, like the grid is getting old. That's a hazard. It's a threat. And we take a look into other things, and then we evaluate it. What can we do, with the taxpayers, and how we can invest, working with the utilities, with the states, and where we should put our efforts. Now, at least personally, one of the approaches I take is I look at other technologies developed elsewhere. And I say, okay, can this technology be transferred? The transferable aspect. I start thinking about NASA back in the 60s, how the medical and computer capabilities were developed as they were trying to go to space. And we do something similar to, for example, the technology that was taken from Oak Ridge, the sensors. The Forestry Service is also using that, but to detect the conditions that can lead to a fire. And that's a win-win, because if the Forestry Service can detect that, it can help avoid a fire from being created. And that's what I found very interesting about the panel presentation, the detection part. That's so critical. Being able to jump on top of the situation, but things happen. Now you have to deal with response, the safety of the workers. That's very critical. And so we take a look at the entire life cycle of resilience to make sure that each element is covered, because sometimes might not be cost effective. So you might have to do other things. And this is pretty much my 25 cents.
Let me add a little bit to the conversation as well. And I think for me, it's like, it doesn't stop. I guess it's like, I think we keep stumbling on things and keep asking questions and being, inquisitive about what's happening. And Arvin, you gave a great example of prescribed fires. And so one of the things, that we've learned is that when those were happening, we were getting triggered a lot. So the system's learning, so we're not spinning everybody up all the time. So we had to learn that process with the panel AI cameras. The other thing that we haven't really talked about yet, but what's on the horizon, how I'm thinking about is, okay, prescribed fires, so now that the utility knows that they're happening, now we can start asking our questions. Look, are there particulates that are getting on our insulators that we need to be thinking about? Do we have to wash our insulators more, because now I know this prescribed fire was close by, and is that causing adverse effects to my equipment? We haven't even talked about it yet. Arvin and I haven't talked about this yet, but this is like one of the things that, as we continue to look at this technology, like what else can I do to help the benefit of how I operate the grid more effectively for my customers? And so I think it's really neat when you're doing research and you see these things and you see this little bit of white light and you start like, oh, we can add this, we can do this. And I think when you're doing the research, you have to be looking to the left and to the right and how broadly this technology can be utilized. And sometimes, I may be caught up in the initial thinking of it, but I just be really open to what else is out there. And I think, panel AI and our relationship, I think, is just getting started on how we can benefit from it for our customers.
I love that use case, Bill.
So it sort of points to, as soon as you have more data, then you have yet more you could do with it, right? As soon as you have more insight, more situational awareness, even beyond the momentary emergent situation. We have a question from Scott Shopman. what has the velocity and speed of product development, testing, launch, that development cycle that you folks who are in technology are familiar with, what's that been like for Pano? And I would be curious too, Stuart, for your small businesses, especially when you have to get government bodies involved. Are they?
Absolutely.
That's not something government bodies tend to. They're not known for this, right?
First of all, thank you for the question, Scott. So, if I look at our team, we're about 30 people. Majority of the folks have come from companies in Silicon Valley, both growth stage as well as large companies like Tesla, Apple, Cisco, et cetera. And what we really wanted to do was build a solution that was super agile. And so I would say, there's just, if we think about the partnership and just how the solution has evolved, there are just so many features that we've rolled out just within the last 6 to 12 months, and some of the initial ones. So we had the camera functionality, and then we found that many of the fire authorities, because these incidents are in the back roads, right? So people are not familiar with how to go drive the engine to that particular location. So we learned that from both the utilities and the fire authorities. So we've actually overlaid Google Maps imagery directly onto the overall 360. So now you can search that. Second thing we heard is, it'd be great to understand where it is relative to points of interest. So we put that in there. Other stuff is, hey, we'd like to understand satellite imagery so we can get tactical intelligence. So if we're going to go in and do bucket drops, or if we're going to figure out where do we deploy resources safely, can we pull that up? And you can do that real time within the first 20, 30 seconds once you get that triangulated imagery. We have compass bearings. We also know that these incidents get shared with aerial dispatch. And so we want to make sure that there is the lat long that they can get to. We're sharing those alerts with drone companies who may need to go in and fly drones in that particular area. And what we've found just incredibly refreshing is there's no shortage of great ideas that are coming. Bill talked about another use case where there's particulate matter, which you can look at through prescribed burns, which may impact infrastructure, right? So what we're doing in our regular check-ins is we actively go and listen. And not all of these are things that we may be able to roll out, but what we try and do is connect the dots to make sure that there is interest from many stakeholders, and they're the things that we're prioritizing.
Yes, I'm going to speak about the office, not the entire department, because there are several offices doing several things. My division, which focus on the grid R&D, we're about maybe 13, 14 people, which is not a lot of people, but we have a wide range of experience. We have what I call, everybody in DC is smart, so I call them smart people anyhow. People from MIT, people like me that have operation experience. And we do a lot of the program management. Some of us, due to our experience, we help our leadership identify potential places where we can invest. One ability that we have that's very strong is that we work with the national labs. They are DOE national labs. Therefore, working with them is easier. However, we also work with the private sector, which takes a little bit more effort. Using Brentford drones or the small businesses as an example, that's a different story because we are required by Congress to invest in small businesses for research. And so something like energy storage, which was done with the labs and others, have taken many years to get what it is. The Brentford drone aspects in this particular example, that company was created, I think, in 2016. They competed for one of the small business efforts in 2017, which happened to be my project that I scoped to respond to hurricanes and things like that. And by 2019, they got a phase 2, a 2-year phase 2. And now they have this phase 3. So it depends where the technology, sometimes the technology, we're the ones that can invest on because it's so expensive and takes a long time. And it doesn't make sense for the utilities to invest on it due to cost. And sometimes it's just transferring technology like AI. AI has been used for other things, so you transfer that technology and you apply it to the needs. Clearly, data, somebody mentioned data, I think it was Bill. Data is critical when it comes to AI, so understanding how to collect that data so the intelligence can think and do their thing requires a lot of partnership with the utilities. So what we call the partnership model with the states and the utility is very critical, because we don't want to start investing on something that's not going to be needed. You know, sometimes it happens like that, like Bill stated, you start with something and then you say, oh, technology in this area have advanced. Let's adjust it and transfer to this other area that's going to be of benefit.
Thanks. Bill, there's a question to you from John Axman. The recent PSPS event included nighttime hours, and it did, and it included some restoration after dark as well, some inspection and restoration after dark. Are the pano cameras capable of detecting fire starts at night? Also, did you utilize the cameras to help accelerate the safety patrols prior to re-energizing? And I'd be really interested in other technologies that you use to accelerate the patrols.
Yeah, so great question. So thank you. I think with the panel technology, we're still trying to figure it out and how to leverage it very well. I think one of the things from a camera standpoint, and we have weather stations as well to figure out like the wind and that aspect of it. But from the recovery aspect of it, you know, we really relied on our patrols, our visual patrols. So I think we got to still do the use case to figure that out. But, you know, again, when we're doing our visual patrols, you know, we're looking at the line, and, you know, we can zoom in, but, you know, we also have very heavy forest here. So for us to really see the line with the panel cameras, I think it's going to be very difficult. I think drone technology to me is the way to figure that out. I think there's more capabilities in that sense. As far as detecting fires at night, I'll actually kick that over to Arvin, and that's, I know we're still looking at that. We're trying to expand the technology.
Yeah, so Bill, we've got a daytime smoke detection algorithm, and we are working on a nighttime smoke detection algorithm. As you can imagine, it's much harder to see, distinguish between a solar flare, a firework versus what is a smoke start. But we have a way to do it. What we're doing is we're actually training the data with as much imagery as we've found. And so we're having good success going through that. The other catch that we have is when we see Urban Alerts, Pulse Point, and others, our intelligence center gets into gear, and we focus the cameras in that direction, and we capture as much of the footage as possible. And leveraging optical zoom and other things, it just provides some additional intelligence. But Bill is spot on, right? So the cameras are seeing what we can see, and unless you have a really large density of them, you're not going to be able to get to that level of precision. So this is where drones and other functionality are going to be helpful in complementing that.
I appreciate that, and was really found what a drone can show you in a quick flight quite amazing. And I think it opens doors for, particularly in the rugged terrain sort of areas, or areas that are not accessible by road for whatever reason, right? The hurricanes that you pointed to, Stuart, as the original use case. But I think also too of your the large scale technology you pointed to, Libby, Montana to Troy, Montana I've been there, and it's remote and rugged.
Yeah,
It's not easy to inspect, period, just period. So it's exciting to have solutions.
yeah. I wanted to make a 10-second point. One thing about the grid is that it's very complex. Something that can be happening to a transmission line located in the area of Oregon can have an impact in California. So looking at things from a system approach, understanding the complexity, and understanding that things that happen in one geographical location can impact another geographical location is also key.
Yeah, we unfortunately experienced that with the bootleg fire last year, burning over the Koi to California. That was really rough, very rough for California that lost 2 gigawatts of import capability just on a dime. All right, well, we are at the top of the hour, and so I want to thank you all for joining me and turn it back to Will to wrap us up.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to our panelists. A really fascinating conversation, and just greatly appreciate your time and expertise on this subject. If anyone in the audience has for follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to anyone in NARUC staff, and we'll make sure your question gets directed to the right person. I just wanted to make a quick announcement that we host this innovation webinar series every month. It's usually on a Thursday, and the next 2 you see here on your screen, we have a long duration storage webinar coming up in October. And in November, we'll be looking at green banks financing a reliable future. So please check out our website to register for both those webinars. And again, thank you to our panel, and thank you, Commissioner Tawney, for moderating, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.